How do we deal with life, knowing it's suffering and that we will inevitably be swallowed by the sand? Better than food, man. One day in August, a man disappeared. He had simply set out for the seashore on a holiday, scarcely half a day away by train, and nothing more was ever heard of him. Investigation by the police and inquiries in the newspapers had both proved fruitless. Hey, Happy New Year. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Hope 2016 was awesome, and I hope 2017 is even better. Hope you and your friends and family are all doing very well, that you're getting some good food this holiday season, and that you're reading some great books. So, Woman in the Dunes is a quiet, eerie, metaphysical masterpiece. This man named Nicky Junpei travels to the beach intent on collecting beetle specimens, in hopes of finding a new species and forging his legacy by having his name associated in perpetuity with an insect. His efforts are crowned with success if his name is perpetuated in the memory of his fellow men by being associated with an insect. So he spends all day looking for these beetle specimens, and then he misses the last bus. And so he's forced to try and find somewhere to stay. And he comes across this village. He finds this enormous pit, this giant chasm in the sand, which is surrounded on all sides. There's a little house at the bottom of this thing. And there's these constant avalanches, waterfalls of sand threatening this little house at the bottom of it. There seems to be no way in or out. And suddenly this old villager appears, this fisherman, and he begins vetting the young man. He asks him if he's associated with the government in any way, and basically he's trying to determine how much he will be missed, or if anybody from the outside will come looking for him. And so he makes the decision that, okay, he's not really that important. So he's like, yeah, we have a place for you to stay, right down here, right this way. And they lower him into this pit. So they have this rope ladder. The villagers use this rope ladder to get in and out of this thing. And so they lower him down, and it's this little shack, right? This rotting little shack in the pit of sand. Enormous walls of sand surrounding on all sides. And he meets the owner of this house, who is this mysterious, somber, 30-year-old woman. And so he comes to realize several important things. One, she's trapped in this pit in this house, alone, by the villagers. 2, she's not quite all there in the head. 3, the sand is constantly moving in on her, and the only way to keep it back is to shovel it every day. And not long ago, her husband and daughter may or may not have been swallowed up by the sand in a typhoon. Also, he's trapped. Woman in the Dunes examines this woman living out a Sisyphean fate, as in the myth of Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the mountain for eternity, only to see it fall back down and being doomed to repeat ad infinitum. She is technically trapped by the villagers who sell the sand for construction. It's a very simple setup. If she fails to shovel the sand, the pit will fill and she will die. Every night the sand moves in. It cascades in sheets blown by the wind. It covers everything. It rots the wood of her roof. It spoils her food. It gets in the water. It seems she is doomed to shovel this sand for the rest of her life or drown in it. Now her fate is also his fate. However, interestingly enough, she never complains. She never identifies as the victim. She takes action and she works in this strange act of resigned martyrdom. It's almost zen. The sand falls, she shovels it away, and she survives. Repeat. In many ways, she is more emotionally fortified than the man, who is constantly panicked and feeling condemned. He did not understand at all the reason why the woman had to be so attached to that river of Hades. Love of home and obligation have meaning only if one stands to lose something by throwing them away. What in the world did she have to lose? Nearly every sentence in the book relates to the sand. It's perfect. It's this omnipresent, encroaching threat to the characters, practically and psychologically. Yet it becomes, at the same time, their reason for living. In fact, he asks her in the beginning, do you shovel to survive or survive to shovel? This undulating, silent, shifting mountain, snaking along in these wave-like patterns and promising this slow, constricting destruction. It's as if the sand itself is corroding his mind and soul throughout the book. When you're panicked and you're put in a situation like this, you begin to start doing things that you never thought you would do. And you'll see what I mean by the end of this. When he first discovers the house and he looks down and he's studying this precarious situation, there's this perfect line of foreshadowing. No matter what they did, he mused, there was no escaping the law of the sand. They will quickly become he and the woman in the dunes. It's a meditation on being. It discusses the anxiety of the individual as it relates to the collective, worrying about what others think in your relationship to society. And it flirts with the concept of pure being, of Dasein, these Heideggerian concepts. Existing without thinking about it, being without thinking about it, not being self-conscious. Dissolving into the stream, into the flow, because of the work you do, which has great meaning because of its urgency, because of its immediacy, as it pertains to your immediate survival. Could this life the man was forced into end up being more meaningful than whatever he was pursuing as a schoolteacher in Tokyo on the outside? That's the question. I didn't understand. But life isn't something one can understand, I suppose. There are all kinds of life, and sometimes the other side of the hill looks greener. What's hardest for me is not knowing what living like this will ever come to. But obviously, you can never know, no matter what sort of life you live. To what degree the woman has imprisoned herself, I have yet to figure out. I was arguing about this with my girlfriend. She thought the woman was trapped. I thought she had resigned herself to this task for unknown reasons. So I went back and searched, and technically, she is trapped by the villagers, though it isn't clear. And I believe this is totally intentional. Kobo Abe leads you on all these different paths. We were fascinated by our different approaches in masculine and feminine perspectives. Is it the sadistic villager's fault that she's in the pit, that she's trapped this man, but she just needed him and she's a victim too? Has she decided to stay in the pit for psychotic, traumatic reasons after the death of her family and just trapped him like a sand spider because she needed to fill that space? Not only emotionally, but also physically, literally. Well, physically in many ways, as we find out. Or this interesting perspective. Have the villagers been abandoned by the outside world, and he represents the outside world, and is treated accordingly, enslaved as an enemy? All of these are implied at different moments. You're trying to find someone or something to blame. That's where your mind wants to go. To have this logical, rational foundation on which to take action. Then it shifts again, and the foundation silently crumbles, just like the sand. The man becomes intimate with the woman, and their relationship is naturally complex. In a way, she needs him. In a way, he needs her. Yet he wants to escape. She does not seem to want to escape, but maybe she secretly does. But has given up, or has just come to love her prison more than the idea of the outside world, which may or may not be what's slowly happening to him. One interpretation, of course, could be what you thought you always wanted wasn't necessarily what you needed. You can't always. Fulfillment, meaning, lacking in his ordinary life, may actually come from this extremely difficult one. Finally, she's forced to temporarily leave the pit for reasons I won't spoil. Does he leave or does he stay? Will he actually be free when he returns to Tokyo? What is he going back to, and what for? Kobo Abe was a Japanese novelist who was described by the obituary that appeared in the 1993 New York Times as a literary master whose haunting visions of people senselessly trapped by modern urban life made him one of Japan's most highly acclaimed post-war authors. The same year he wrote Woman in the Dunes, he was expelled from the Communist Party. This was 1962. So by that time, he had already fallen out of favor with it. And this is very interesting because the man in the book, who is obsessed with collecting insects, which Abe was too in real life, drifts away from the collective, away from the group, and becomes involved with this other woman, this other outsider who is very much on her own individual path. The individuals separate from society to live a life that is fulfilling to them. At one point in the book, the woman actually says, referring to the people that the villagers sell sand to in the outside world, "Why should we worry what happens to others?" She gets cold, and she kind of snaps at him. She says, "Why should we worry what happens to others?" His political life cannot be ignored when taking into account the ideas present in Woman in the Dunes. However, if one character is meant to explicitly represent the Communist Party that he's trying to escape from, I don't know. This is the only novel by Abe I've read, but I've heard that the running theme through his work concerns the idea of the individual in modern society. Tokyo is the best example of a metropolis and culture hyper-focused on the collective. Practically so. With 36 million people, it seems it would have to be, otherwise it would just collapse like a house of cards. So it's interesting to keep in mind that his concern with the individual, especially in the 60s at that time, is sort of a culturally rebellious preoccupation. If you're a fan of post-war Japanese authors or Yukio Mishima, and I am the biggest, you'll find it interesting to note they were good friends. And this is extremely interesting to me because Mishima was very, very right-wing, and Abe was very, very left-wing. Of course, Mishima eventually committed suicide, so I was trying to figure out if there was any sort of like recorded conversation that they had, or if Abe actually wrote anything about their relationship after Mishima killed himself in 1970. I haven't been able to find anything yet, but if somebody knows of something, throw it at me. Hit me up. The filmmaker Hiroshi Teshigahara collaborated with Abe and directed an adaptation in the 60s that was just as good as the book, and I think it even won an award at Cannes. There are 1,000 things to discuss in this book, which is why I love it. However, the erotic element is taken to a whole new level in the film. The black and white visual depiction of these nude bodies struggling against the elements covered in sand. Their sexual relationship is filled with this visually stunning anguish. Teshigahara got it so right. One of the best films of all time. One of my favorite books. One of the best films of all time. Period. The soundtrack also magnificently captures this lurking, oppressive quality of the sand, this constant antagonist surrounding you on all sides, moving closer and closer and closer. It's just brilliant. It's better than food. You gotta go check it out. Just like in the novel, the sand is this omnipresent force of inevitable doom. It represents time. Sand is the metaphor for time. Yes, the sands of time. You keep pushing that boulder up the hill, one day it's going to be too much. You'll be too old and frail to keep doing the task, and it will crush you, and you will join the sand, swallowed up, back into the cosmos, back into the dust flow. You stop shoveling, you die. You try to escape, you fail. You fall in love, it won't save you. You'll still want out, and even if you get out, you'll get thrown right back in. And even if you got out, even if you made it, you wouldn't be any more free than you were. It's the same traps. The same traps. So where do you go? How do you live? What do you do? How do you find solace in existence? It's easy to be pessimistic about this. I'm totally guilty of it. It takes no effort or responsibility at all to feel like the victim of life. Why, you might ask? Because life is suffering. It's obviously suffering. No suffering, no pain, no life. The question is, what will make life worth living even though you are guaranteed suffering? This is the same question that every single one of us struggle with every day. And is there an answer? Yes, absolutely, I believe so. However, it's not the same for everybody. My answer is not necessarily your answer. Our situations are entirely different. There are many answers, and it depends on who you're asking and what position they're in. We'll be discussing this much more as the channel continues. No matter how bad things get, it can always get a fuck of a lot worse. Case in point, you could always be kidnapped by a crazy woman who forces you to shovel sand all day for the rest of your life, lest you be engulfed by it. That's a lot of suffering. It's not the question of loving the suffering, it's the question of what would keep the man happy and smiling and deciding to stay in the pit. I think that's what Kobo Abe is concerned with. It's a representation of this enormous reality which is alluring and sensual and yet at the same time cold and merciless and cruel. A lot of these ideas that I become obsessed with come from the work of Jordan B. Peterson, who's worked through all of the great novelists. He's a psychology professor and philosopher. He's worked through Nietzsche and Tolstoy, Solzhenitsyn and Dostoevsky. He's worked through all of it, and he's done all of this research, and he's this extremely concise, brilliant man who is discussing, the ideas of kind of the tragedy of life and suffering, and how do we deal with that, and good, evil, God, nihilism, If you're familiar with him, you'll probably hear me adopting and trying to spread a lot of his ideas and terminology. I'm very, very impressed by him. If you are not familiar with him, for God's sakes, go listen. Do it right now. I'm dead serious on this one. This is the find of the year. Kobo Abe was also going through Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Heidegger, Kafka, Poe. He studied all these guys and many more, and the list goes on. Heideggerian concern with being, and, instead of like in Poe's The Cask of Amontillado, being walled up in a crypt, he's dropped into this hole, this pit of sand. It's kind of a horror story, but it has that Kafka absurdity to it, One day, Nicky Jumpai woke up to discover he had to shovel sand for eternity. His other activities would include drinking water, smoking cigarettes, having sex with a devastated widow who complains less than him, and science experiments involving, yes, you guessed it, sand. I can't remember I can't remember who originally came up with the metaphor or who wrote it, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it went something along the lines of when you reach the top of the mountain, you realize that you're just at the bottom of a much bigger mountain of sand. You ever try and climb a mountain of sand? Fuck. Sand is better than food. Always remember that life is far too short to shovel sand and read bullshit. I know this Patreon thing can sort of be obnoxious and, donate and support, yada yada, but, it really, really does help. I know it seems like there's this distance, but I mean, it's really, if you're taking out your card and you're putting in your information, if you've done that, if you were thinking about doing that or you're doing it, then tell me what would be worth it for you. I mean, really, I can't thank you and the people who have supported me already enough. This runs entirely off of the generosity of people who love books. Tell me what you would find valuable and I will try to pull it off. Right now I have a goal on Patreon. I'm trying to get enough to invest in some lights so I won't be dictated by the sun. I'm sure if you've seen my videos before, you'll notice there's sort of these changes, dramatic changes in lighting. This window for shooting in winter, even though it's Los Angeles, has gotten pretty short. So I would like to bring you more books and not have to worry about that. I and many other readers would appreciate it tremendously if you could help me out so I can bring more books to you. I'm still searching for a cost-effective way to produce merch, like coffee mugs and t-shirts and all that. The thing is, I've noticed my audience, a lot of you guys are not in the US, and that means that shipping costs are going to be like, so then it's like, so I'm still looking, so any ideas or suggestions or possible collaborations, that'd be awesome. Yeah, just get in touch with me. I'm on all the social media. You can find me Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Goodreads, yada yada. Yeah, alright. So, always remember life is too short to shovel sand and read bullshit. Hope you guys are doing really well. Subscribe. If you donate to the show, of course, you get to check out the private vlog. Lots of great stuff on there. Hope you guys are all well. Send some book recommendations. Tell me what's better than food, and take care of yourselves. Make sure you got those New Year's resolutions. Be stronger, be better, be... much more to come. Have a great night. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.